Sully is an almost entirely single-actor-centric, single-event-centric retelling of what's known as the Miracle on the Hudson, when Captain Sullenberger saved 155 lives, including his own, after his plane struck a flock of geese very shortly after takeoff, and rather than attempting what was most likely an impossible return to an airport, he forced a water landing in the Hudson, something that only an extremely gifted pilot could pull off with no casualties. The film depicts these events several times over, actually, but also depicts the inner turmoil of Sully, played by Tom Hanks, who lets doubts creep in that maybe he could have gotten back to the airport after all, and he may have needlessly endangered everybody on the plane, and the standard investigation that followed, where the investigators are inclined to believe that returning to the airport was possible based on simulations done both with computers and with other pilots, while Sully feels that simulations don't come close to the real thing, but while also letting that doubt that I mentioned creep in. This is the latest film from Clint Eastwood, who in the past had a pretty spotty record as a director, but in recent years has churned out many great films like Gran Torino, American Sniper, Invictus, Million Dollar Baby, and so on. I called the film singer-actor focused earlier because it has a very small cast, and even with a good performance from Aaron Eckhart as the co-pilot, Tom Hanks steals every scene that he's in, and most of the scenes that he's not in. I call it single-event focused because while I expected a slow build-up with the crash being towards the middle of the film and then the investigation building towards a climax, instead I got a non-linear narration with the film starting off with the crash already having happened. But we do get to see it multiple times from different angles and perspectives, each one a bit more jarring than the last. Another thing that I was unprepared for was how effective the film is. For an event that is fairly recent, having only happened 7 years ago and knowing how it turns out, Eastwood still manages to craft a tense, gripping sense of suspense that grows with each retelling of the crash, accumulating in the review of the audio footage at the final hearing, which fills in some gaps and stuff that the other depictions had not given us. I was also unprepared for being as unnerved as I was. Throughout the film, I had this feeling of slight dread, and about halfway through, as a horrified bystander in a skyscraper conference hall watched as the plane made its way toward the river, it clicked with me. New York City doesn't exactly have a good history with plane crashes, especially in recent memory, and while these events are from 7 years ago, the events from 15 years ago loom over the picture like a shadow, though I'm glad to say that it's acknowledged toward the end of the film in a way that is a bit of a relief. The film's strength comes from Tom Hanks' performance and the suspense, which is a wonder, as we know how it turns out, as well as the cinematography, with the muted bluish color palette that Warner Brothers films seems to have almost made their trademark. The weakness of the film is its short length, barely cresting 90 minutes, and leaving you wanting a bit more of a cool down after the intense climax. And although Sully's wife gets plenty of screen time, his two daughters are background characters at best. They might have added something to the film, and I can't help but wonder what was left on the cutting room floor. That being said, Sully is an effective and gripping thriller that is strongly rooted in fact. The only bits that were clearly dramatized are that the investigators came off a bit more like prosecutors to give the film a better sense of conflict, which I thought worked. My only real complaint being the short length and a small warning that certain people may find watching it a slightly stressful experience. I'll give it an 8 out of 10, a solid film which I'll recommend.